Chapter 7. The Mayor, the Wife and the Football Club. Soon after the move to Bleakridge, Bursley made Denry a town councillor. He was the youngest councillor in the town, and one of the richest men in the 5 towns. But Councillor Cottrell still called him young man. Denry did not like Councillor Cottrell, but he was very friendly with Nellie and her mother. So, when he bought one of the first cars in the 5 towns, he decided to invite them to go for a drive. When he got there, Nellie came to the door. "Come in," she said. "I've got a surprise for you." In the sitting room, next to Mrs. Cottrell, Denry saw a wonderful woman, beautifully dressed in black. When she turned to look at him, Denry suddenly recognized her. It was Ruth. Then he remembered that Ruth had married a rich man, Mr. Capron Smith, who had recently died. "Well, Denry," she said softly. "Well, Ruth?" Conversation was not difficult. Ruth was talking about a holiday in Switzerland. Denry listened with interest. After a few minutes, the front door opened, and Mr. Cottrell was heard in the hall. He did not come into the sitting room, so Mrs. Cottrell went out to speak to him. When she came back, she was crying. "It's the bank," she cried. "After all these years, and now, suddenly, all his money." Nellie and Ruth ran to her, and Denry decided it was probably better to leave. But as he walked into the hall, he met Councillor Cottrell. He was looking very worried. "Ah, Denry," he said. "You're a friend of the family. We've no secrets from you. I'm afraid things are looking bad. The fact is, the bank wants its money and I can't pay." "What are you going to do?" asked Denry. "We'll all go to Canada. My brother lives there. He's in the building business. He'll give me a job. It's stupid, really. I only need £2,000 for a month or two until I sell the houses I'm building. I say," he continued, "you don't have 1,000 or two, do you, young man? There'll be an excellent profit in 2 or 3 months. You and I have been friends for 10 years. "And I suppose I've come to visit you once a fortnight," answered Denry. "Perhaps 250 times in 10 years. That's £8 a visit, Cottrell. That's more expensive than the most fashionable doctor in England." This conversation does not make Denry look very kind. But Councillor Cottrell had called him young man too many times. Several weeks later, the Cottrells left Bursley and took the train to Liverpool, where they would take the ship to Canada. On the day they left the 5 towns, Denry happened to meet Ruth in the street. "Did you know they had the cheapest tickets for the ship?" she said. "It's terrible, and it's too late to change them now." "No, it isn't," said Denry. "I could go to Liverpool and arrange it. The ship doesn't leave until tomorrow." "Let's both go," she said, "and we'll pay half each for their new tickets." they had a very pleasant train journey. Ruth was warm and friendly to Denry, and as the train pulled into Liverpool, he had a very strange thought. I could still marry her. She's a fine woman, and now she's rich herself. They found the Cottrells and paid for them to travel in a more comfortable part of the ship. Mr. Cottrell said he would repay them, Mrs. Cottrell cried, and Nellie said nothing at all. The ship's bell rang for the second time. Denry and Ruth said their goodbyes and started to leave. Then Denry looked back and saw Nellie's sad little face. He felt as he had never felt before in his life. He wondered what was happening to his legs. He turned and ran back to Nellie. "Look here," he whispered. "Come with me for a moment. There's something I want to give you. I left it in the taxi." Ruth was already lost in the crowds of people leaving the ship. "But there's not time. The bell. It'll only take a minute. Quick!" Without waiting to argue, he took her hand, pulled her off the ship and towards a taxi. "Which taxi is yours?" asked Nellie. "Anyone, it doesn't matter. Jump in." He pushed her in. "I'll miss the boat." "I know you will." "I don't want you to go to Canada." "What are you going to do with me?" whispered Nellie. "Well, what do you think?" shouted Denry. "I'm going to marry you, of course." One evening, Councillor Henry Machin sat down to tea with his wife, Nellie, in the house in Bleakridge. He opened the newspaper and read aloud, "Sudden death of Councillor Blore." "Poor man," said Nellie. "And he was going to be mayor in November, wasn't he?" "So he was," said Denry. "Who'll be mayor now?" "Barlow, I suppose," said Denry. "Barlow? He's an awful man. Nobody likes Barlow. Why don't they make you mayor?" "Would you like to be mayoress?" "I don't know. Why not?" "I probably will be mayor after Barlow, but I want to be the youngest mayor, which means I'll have to do it this year while I'm still 33. "Who decides?" "The council, of course. But you're right. Nobody likes Barlow, and he's having a lot of problems with the football club. He's the chairman, you know." Bursley Football Club was having a very bad year. In fact, it had had several very bad years. It lost most of its games, and because not many people wanted to see Bursley lose, few people went to watch the games. A few days after Denry's conversation with Nellie, there was a crowded meeting at the town hall to discuss the club's future. Barlow, the chairman, got up to speak. "I've been chairman of this club for 13 years. In that time, I've put £2,000 of my own money into the club. I can't put in any more. But what have you, the people of Bursley, done for your club? You don't come and watch. If we lose a game, you stay at home the next week. We lose £50 or £60 every time we play, and we can't go on like this." Several other people stood up to speak. Most of them had nothing kind to say about Councillor Barlow. All of them said that the club needed new players.
"New players?" said Barlow. "Where's the money for new players? Has anybody got £1,000?
Nobody offered money. But more speakers stood up to ask for new players. Finally, a man at the back of the hall stood up and walked up to the front.
"It's Machin," said somebody. "Good old Machin."
Denry turned and looked at the sea of faces. "I don't know a lot about football," he said, "although I enjoy a good game. But I do want to say something about new players. Isn't it true that one of the best players in England comes from Bursley?"
"Yes!" shouted the crowd. "Calliar! He's the best player in England!"
"That's right, Calliar. He left Bursley when he was 19 to play for Liverpool. He scored a lot of goals there in 3 years. Then he went to York, didn't he? And York have some money problems now, I hear, and want to sell some of their players. Gentlemen, Calliar must come back home, to Bursley." The crowd in the hall were now very noisy and excited. Barlow jumped angrily to his feet.
"And how are we going to get Calliar? Councillor Machin says he doesn't know much about football, and it's true. Aston Villa have already offered £700 for Calliar. Blackburn have offered £750. Has anybody here got £800?
"Have you finished?" asked Denry, who was still standing. The hall exploded with laughter. "Now," called Denry, "Mr. Calliar, will you please come up to the front of the hall?" The hall was suddenly silent. A tall young man walked nervously down to the front of the hall.
"That's him," said somebody. "It's Calliar! Good old Calliar! Good old Machin!"
"Well?" asked Denry, turning to Barlow. "Do you want him?"
"Yes, but what about the money?"
"That's my problem. I've just come back from York. If you want him, you can have him." 2 days later, a letter appeared in the Signal. It said that Denry should be the next mayor. Other letters followed, saying the same thing, and that Bursley needed a young and popular mayor. And, when the council met, it agreed. That evening, Denry told Nellie, "You'll be the mayoress to the youngest mayor, and it's cost me, with hotels and travel, about £811. After the meeting, a group of councillors were talking about Denry.
"What a card!"
said one, laughing.
"There's never been a man like him in all the 5 towns," said another. "But he's never done a day's work in his life," said Barlow. "What's he done for the town?" "What's he done? He's made us all laugh. That's what he's done,